Good morning, one and all. Welcome to the Ethical Culture Society of Bergen County. Welcome to our new guests who come in the room. It's lovely to see all of you as well. My name is Curt Collier. I'm the leader, it's called, here at the Ethical Society. I just came back from a conference yesterday where I did 3 workshops and then finished the workshops, drove all the way here, did some prepping, so I hope the food was okay. Yeah, right, good. Huh? Somewhere, yeah. Stormy, I had to get back to Stormy, you know, she's very demanding, so. So good to see you. So, just want to do, by way of opening words, is why are we having brunch in a philosophy discussion? And then actually, one of my favorite philosophers in the history of the world was Epicurus. And Epicurus lived in Athens during the classical period and had a philosophy that's named after Epicureanism, but it's often misunderstood in the modern times. Mostly we think of epicures as people who enjoy the finer things in life, but it can also be about food and luxury goods and things like that. His main focus, of course, was just for us to find the middle ground between pain and pleasure, and to find a place to just enjoy life, to linger, to take some moments, and to not let us pass us by. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And one of the things I read about him is that his favorite thing to do was he had a garden school. So if you've been to Athens, on one side of town was Plato's Lyceum, on one side of town, and on the other side, Aristotle's Lyceum, and on the other side was Plato's Academy, so they were right away. Epicurus put his school right in the middle of town, so you didn't have to walk too far. He also put it in a garden, and his idea was the nicest thing that humans could do, perhaps, is just to build a garden and have a place where people could have cool drink and maybe eat some olives or dates and just kind of hang out and talk about the finer things in life. So I thought, what an appropriate way to kick off our 3-week philosophical series with a little bit of brunch. So please, the Southerner in me says no one can go home until we eat everything. So please feel free to get up and grab more food. That doesn't, to me, that makes me happy. So that's not a distraction. And so welcome to the Society for Ethical Culture. So as this is the first of our 3-part philosophy series, next week I'll remind you that Massimo Pigliucci is coming here. Massimo is one of the foremost scholars in the United States on Stoicism. In fact, I was just at a conference and the Stoa Foundation was there, and I said, do you know Massimo? And they, oh, of course we know Massimo. So I said, well, he's coming to our place. So quite the fun. He's actually a friend of the society, otherwise it'd be kind of untouchable for us. But it's so great to have him coming. And then the third Sunday is going to be David Sprintzen. David Sprintzen also teaches philosophy, but is really about his activism and how he's used his philosophy for that. He's written a new book on emergence in philosophy, which is a little bit different from emergence in biology. And so he'll be here. Each time I'm going to cook you breakfast, so if you want to come at 10 a.m. and join in our repast, please do so. And it's optional, of course. So, but there is plenty of food, and like I said, just grab some more stuff if you like. So not only do I work here at the Ethical Society and teach construction tomorrow, but actually what I do also is teach philosophy at Fairleigh Dickinson University. I've taught philosophy at other universities. Well, I usually teach science. That's actually the thing I taught the most of at college level. But my first degree at Texas A&M University was in philosophy, and I've kept that up ever since and continued to do that, such that it's nice that Fairleigh Dickinson offered me to come in and teach philosophy of science and bioethics. So I thought, what was I going to talk about to kick off our series? And here's an interesting little fact, right? So I'm very interested in applied ethics. I'm very interested in environmental ethics and how we think about these things. One of the things that we want to do in the United States is to create a stronger foundation of ideas, especially in the progressive community. As you know, that there's now this whole process of dismantling some of the big institutions we built And I think to a certain extent, in my opinion, it's because we weren't strong enough and embedded these things strong enough within the whole society, not just in the realm of government, so that people valued institutions the way that we do. So here's my question. They did a survey of several different people from around the world, and they asked them, if you won $1 million, if you won the lottery, would you still go back to work? Now, here's an interesting question. Which nation said, by and large, yes, I'd go back to work? Keep working. Japan would have been a very good guess. They came in second behind this other country. The United States came in. Y'all won. How many of you, if you won the lottery, would still go to, or would, even if you're working, would still go to? Yeah, so that's an interesting thing, right? So somehow we define ourselves through our work, right? It's part of how we see ourselves as Americans. For some reason, we've had these influences that we're going to explore that have kind of worked our way into our collective unconsciousness. How many of you would definitely not work if you won the lottery? Yeah. So the few outsiders, you're excused, but you're slackers, You've always heard of these, the FIRE movement, which is financial independence, retire early. Have you heard of these young people who just accumulate massive amounts of wealth and retire in their 40s? And actually, what's interesting is not what they thought about, but what other people thought about it. And a lot of people thought that's somehow wrong. And so the question is why would they say that? Why is it that Americans would have a problem with that, as do we have all these attacks, of course, the image that goes all the way back to the 80s of the welfare queen who's just basically sucking off the system, even though that was completely untrue. It was just a made-up story, frankly, right, to do this. So it gave them a reason to get away from the Americans, the AFDIC, right, the aid to families with dependent children, and replace it with, what's the name of the new law we have? The Personal Reconciliation Work Act, which is to get people to go back to work, because work is good for you. It's written into this law, right? We still think of that today. Well, these people, okay, they've got a sick kid at home and they're struggling with diabetes and they live in a small town where there are no jobs. Therefore, we're going to cut off their Medicaid because they're not working. Huh? Put that into perspective. Did you want to add something to that?
Well, I think
you got to use a mic if you're going to comment. We're going to put you out there, Fina. You had to then be on the internet. They're watching,
I think it's the influence of the freaking pilgrims. The Puritans and the pilgrims.
Well, you're stealing my thunder, Afina. Give me some. Thank you for coming out. I appreciate that. That's it. Thank you. Yeah. So we do have this legacy, right? So that we have this influences in our country that have kind of crept into it. And I just kind of say work does occupy a tremendous amount of our lives, right? We all went to work, or even if you're at home, that's work. But how much work consumes us to a certain extent. And we're a nation where efficiency and all these things have been pushing up a higher level. And so the question is do we have in the U.S. a philosophy of work? What is it that drives us to do all this? Money. Money, well, yeah. If there's not a social security net, I guess, as the way they have in other countries to do that. All right, Dan, we're going to sneak it in. This is. Let's give it to Dan first.
So, I think the answer is partly yes, that there's this notion that work is, redeeming for the soul and all of that crap. But I think there's another part of it that I don't think is so easy to put down, even while it gives birth to awful things, and that is the notion that work is a contribution to the larger whole. I don't work if I'm spending inordinate amounts of time growing some obscure tree which takes huge amounts of physical and mental labor. Yeah, I'm working, but I'm not contributing to the whole. People will see that as a hobby. Whereas if I'm building nuclear weapons, God forbid, people will think of that as contributing to society. Now, I may disagree with what kind of a contribution that is, but there's this notion that as human beings, we have an obligation to contribute to the community. That becomes expressed in the form of work. Work is that contribution which we do when, maybe we can define it as, which we do when we would actually prefer to be doing other things for ourselves.
Sure.
And in that context, the notion that people should work to get social benefits becomes popular. Now, I think that notion, as you pointed out, is totally wrong-headed when it's actually applied. But I think that's one of the reasons why it's a popular notion, and a notion that grabs a lot of people, especially when it's divorced from the specifics of who is actually being forced to do stuff.
Sure.
So I think it's a mistake for those of us on the left, I'll say that, to divorce the notion of work from the notion of making a contribution to society as one can.
Sure. A nation heavily influenced by utilitarians, from Locke to Jeremy Bentham to all those.
Well, I'm also thinking of Karl Marx saying that the ultimate society would be from each according to his ability,
to
not
each
from
according to
each,
their needs.
not
Yeah.
to each oneself according to it, but from each according to his ability and to each according to his need. And that from each according to his ability, I think, plays across a very large swath of people, not just Marxists and not just reactionaries either. And so I think that's one of the things one has to come to grips with politically when one criticizes the ways in which work is used as punishment.
Sure. Let's take it from the French, who only work 7 weeks out of the year and the rest is paid vacations.
Excellent segue. I think in the US, like in some countries in the world, there's a strong spirit of entrepreneurship. And I think if you ask people if they would continue working when they win the lottery, they say yes, because they imagine themselves building something new for themselves, starting a company, starting something.
Making more money, right?
Not necessarily working for someone else.
Yeah.
Whereas in some countries in the world, people just imagine themselves as slaves, or the proletarians, working for the capitalists. And so they don't envision themselves working if they don't need to.
Sure.
We have 3 hands on Zoom.
Okay. We'll take a couple more comments and we'll move on. We're not really ready for a discussion yet, but okay, Jim.
I think that we Americans are probably among the most propagandized people on the face of the planet. And I think that we are programmed to be aspirational, to act aspirationally, to vote aspirationally, and to basically think that if we work hard, we will become as rich as anyone. And America is the land of opportunity. And that's really ingrained. I mean, there's a story about a guy who is the owner of a company, and it's a very successful company, and he buys himself a Lamborghini, and one of his workers says, "Wow, that's some car." And he says, "Yes, and if you work really, really hard, I'm going to get another one next year."
Right. Very good. Thanks, Jim. And we got Rich and then Joelle.
Okay.
And then I'm cutting you off.
I
Go
grew
ahead,
up,
Rich.
Yep. I grew up poor, and I read at some point the Horatio Alger stories, and I got it from Current Society also. You know, you work hard. Luckily, in my case, it was educate yourself very well, too. That's not true for everyone. You go out and work, and you make money. And that's supposed to be a successful life. Unfortunately for me, when my son was born and all the trauma in my background, it eventually became very clear to me that it's not just about money. It's not just about surface things. You have to have a society, and there's some better ones in the world, that know that money is not unimportant, but they know that morality and all that applies, including meaningfulness of work. Define work, first of all. Is it just a job? Curt, do you do a job? We think you do a job. You enlighten us. You tell us about ethical culture. You tell us about morals. You tell us about philosophy. I discovered in my life, I didn't know anything about that when I grew up, and it is equally, if not more so important than earning money. And everything that happened in this country, how we came here with the work ethic, and that it was easy in the beginning when people spread out and just conquered the Indians. All you have to do is work hard. Well, we filled up this country, and the system is rigged for those on the top more than on the bottom, because we've had these ethos, these things, these historical things that we believe, and it's no longer true. We need to be social democrats. Social democrats essentially say we the people, and that means everyone, the poorest of the poor and the wealthiest of the wealthy, and everyone has to contribute according to their means.
Okay,
So
all our
I
hidden
don't.
Marxists are coming out, and we'll go now with
Well,
Joel.
I was going to say I'm not a Marxist. I don't agree, but okay.
Well,
Hey, um, so I just have some thoughts because of taking me a long time, but I have been absorbing a lot of information just from like a non-white perspective over the last however many years, and maybe it's, like I said, going slow, my understanding, but there's just like the history, particularly of the like Caribbean, struck me recently of, I guess, when the Europeans first came to the Caribbean and they did try to co-opt the native population into working the fields and plantations and everything. And they just they weren't that interested. They're contented with, a more simple life, living off the land, which is, to be fair, much more difficult in the original European climates, right? So you had to plan ahead and you had to work and you had to, whereas maybe in some of the tropical climates, you don't have to have that mentality as much just to survive. But nonetheless, anyways, they couldn't get these guys to work, night and day. So they killed them. And so they brought in slaves from Africa and everything. And it's just so important, I think, to like recognize like how far back it goes, and like Curt knows the philosophy and the history too, but I think just like those like indigenous communities that even now, like there's a story, I think someone who's like a leader in the Southwest, and he says the white man's eyes are always searching. We don't know what they're searching for. What do they want? How can they not be contented and satisfied? And it is really culturally ingrained so deep in us. And yes, there is that like wanting to be valuable too from like a religious standpoint. You sort of have to earn your salvation and fear and trembling by working, So if you are being lazy, that's a sin, right? And that's not being, taught to everyone worldwide. They understand that relaxing is not sinful, right? So, yep, there's a lot.
yeah. So I think you've all encapsulated kind of the stories. I hate to ask ethical culturists because they answer questions. People here are deeply read, and I think you've touched, all of you, onto some of the things that have shaped our culture and influenced us. I want to go back through kind of a little bit of a history of philosophy and ideas about what other people have said about that probably has shaped the way that we think about labor in this country. Of course, we know that the Aristotle and Plato, which is kind of the founders of Western thinking to a certain extent, both had a very dismal view of work. Right? Work was not something you were supposed to do. You'll hear Massimo Pigliucci, who's going to introduce the concept of eudaimonia, right? That you're just supposed to live the good life, to be to have pleasure, to find a way to make your life as enjoyable and fulfilling as possible. And work didn't contribute to that, especially if you think of the ancient days, that work was not something that they believed extensively in. And of course, these are people who spent most of their time sitting around reading books or scrolls, shall we say, and thinking about these things, and probably were not connected to labor in quite the ways that we think to. Both Aristotle and Plato came from wealthy families, as did Diogenes and the Cynics, who held also a very dismal view of work, but he was also an extremely rich kid who just got mad and decided with his father that he was going to go and rebuke all of that. So the ancient Greeks did not have an appreciation for work. So work was something to be avoided, right? Life, enjoying it, was reading and pleasure and being with friends and sipping tea in a garden. That was life. Work is what you do just to get to that position, maybe, but that's all it was. The philosopher John Dewey thought that perhaps one of the reasons why the Greeks held a very dismal view of this is that they didn't think you could learn something from work. Well, you could learn how to make things, and the ancient Greeks were expert craftsmen in so many respects, and could do all kinds of stuff. But they didn't think that that was a basis of knowledge. Neither Plato nor Aristotle thought that we could actually learn something about that. And the philosopher John Dewey said, if you think of the Greeks, one of the things that they're on is a quest for certainty. John Dewey put in his book, A Quest for Certainty. And that we had a dismal view about labor in the past because they didn't think you could actually learn something from it in the same ways. It couldn't be certain. It's just something in order to advance through life. And that was the view for many, many people. Work was what, if you were poor or you got stuck doing something or you were enslaved in ancient Rome or something like that, Epictetus himself, one of the most famous Stoic philosophers, had been enslaved most of his life. And he said, well, there's some things in my life I can control and there's some things in my life I can't control. And so therefore, I'm just going to focus on the things that I can make a difference about, right? And my work, my labor is just something I have no control over, and there I'm going to be out there. And something happened in the United States during the pandemic because we all were sent home, right? Everybody went home and had to eventually work there. We actually followed, I'm an OSHA instructor too, and one of the things we do is called this hierarchy of controls for protection, and the first thing you do is eliminate the risk. So we were all sent home, and then after you eliminate the risk, you do substitution. How can we still work and do this? And so we found ways. Luckily, Zoom was born. Could you imagine if this had happened before Zoom? We would have all partied our ass off and sat at home and did nothing. Unfortunately, fought a major pandemic. But yeah, Zoom made it possible, luckily, magically, for all of us to continue to go to work and to school sitting at home. By the way, all of our youth just all went to their friend's house, sat in the same room, but turned their cameras around so it didn't look like they were sitting in the same room. And you did that probably to a certain extent too. So, but then we were told recently to go back to work. And you see the struggle that many people have now about that. It's become a thing, which is part of what kind of led me into this conversation is, what is it that people have suddenly thought about in labor? Right, why do I have to go to an office? Why do I have to drive all the way to Manhattan and go spend a bunch of time with people who are not my family when I could be just as productive doing these kinds of things at home? And there are a lot of great philosophers. See, any of you are fans of Fisher in this room? Written extensively on the new kind of disassociation we have with our labor, bringing on kind of terms from that. But so where did we get this fascination with work the way we have, that even though they say you can be just as efficient as home, why do we have to go to the office? Which, for people like Foucault and others, which is because it's all about power, right? That's the philosopher Foucault who said these are really about power over in our societies and stuff. This kind of continued, this kind of dislike of labor and things like that, almost until we get to the Renaissance, actually to the period of the Reformation. And at that time, of course, all the way up to Benedict's rule. So the Benedictines basically had, anybody know their motto? Do you know their motto? This is Grayson, who runs his own philosophy club at a Catholic high school. What was the Benedictine 2 words? Labor and prayer and labor. Do you know what it is in Latin? Yeah, ora and labore. So you're supposed to just pray and work. Put your head down, just keep working, make sure you do these things, and then so you die, you're ready to go to heaven. But if you're not working, you're idle hands are the devil's workshop and all those kind of stuff. That there was an idea that, listen, life is drudgery. We're going to have some kind of next world that's coming, and therefore it's a good thing to continue just to put our head down and work. And that was Benedictine's rule, right? Prayer and work, as a way to kind of insulate yourself from all the other things you should not be doing. By the time we get to the Protestant Reformation, though, especially under Calvin and Luther, both Calvin and Luther basically never expressly said this, but there was a belief that starts to emerge that some of you are going to go to heaven and some of you are going to go to hell. Now, Luther was not a strict predestinationist as like John Calvin was, but Calvin literally thought some of you are going to go to heaven and some of you are going to go to hell, no matter what you do. If you're good, if you're destined for heaven, you're going to go to heaven no matter what. If you're destined for hell, no matter how good you live your life, you're going to go to hell. Right? You know who you are in this room, probably. So, and so for some people, though, the idea is, well, man, how do I know I'm going to get to heaven? And one of the ways that you could maybe know is if God had smiled upon you because you were a wealthy person, right? That maybe the people who are going to heaven are doing better in this world, and therefore they're part of the elect who are going to make it into heaven. Well, then that creates the kind of neurosis in a way of saying, man, I need to make some money because I want to prove that I'm also, in a way, can go to heaven, and I also want to prove to other people that I'm going to heaven, because you're not supposed to base anything on people who are going to hell, right? So this creates a new kind of ethic that emerges in the 1500s called the Protestant work ethic. Yeah, literally the Protestant work ethic, yeah. And it's this notion that, yes, you need to do these things in order to prove your own salvation. Now, that's not true of the Catholic nations. And thanks, Joel, for pointing out the fact of the difference between those kind of two mindsets. When the Calvinists and the predestinationists figured out that we needed to work and prove that we were going to go to heaven by putting our head down, they focused on a lot of industry and wealth and money and monetizing. All the way up into Holland, it's your fault too. We'll blame you in the room. This notion of Puritanism that you work, just like the Catholics had said with work and prayer, but for the Protestants it was also you needed to do something. It's interesting, if you look in the in the Reformation, what people thought their kids' education should include. In Protestant nations, it was learning a skill, it was learning how to do money, the birth of corporations in Northern Europe, this kind of whole notion of building those stuff. Catholic parents are sending people to learn how to play the lute. They're sending them to poetry lessons and theater and those kinds of stuff. And you see a division in economics that's going to dominate all of Europe and into the United States to this present moment, right? This kind of notion of what's important in life. Should you just be making money and showing that you're out there, or can I just enjoy life? Can I listen to poetry? And the French are somewhere in between because they stayed Catholic for too long. So that's the kind of thing. That's why they only work for 7 weeks and get paid the rest of the year for days off. So that kind of notion of what is the good life? Sitting in Provence and drinking wine and having grapes, that's life. What we're doing is not life. But if you were in the Protestant kind of work ethic of a time, it has a deeper significance. This notion of that work has become so important. By the time we get to someone like Friedrich Hegel, who's basically saying, yeah, that's how important, that we're moving closer to the end of history. I think you were kind of alluding to this notion, he called it the end of history. which is where we would be so rational, so deep in our thought, and so complex that we would basically just conform to society. He thought that was the highest level. You'd be smart enough to know you need to follow the rules, put your head down and do your work. That's what you should do, right? That's the highest level of part of that. Except Hegel said, but how we come to the problem of work? And he said that we seem to be alienated somehow. Yes, we can be smart, we can be rational, we can use our brains, we can create a good society. But work is this different thing. And he thought that there was this dissociation, that we're somehow alienated from our own labor by this stuff. Karl Marx would read him, of course, Hegel, and take this in and adapt into what he called his dialectical materialism, which is basically to say that labor is not only you're not only alienated from your labor. Right now, people are in factories. They're not artisans anymore. They're not sitting at home crafting a whole basket and making that thing. You're going into a factory, and for efficiency's sake, because it is highly more efficient, you're just you're putting the head on the pin. That's all you're doing. Right, yeah, overtimes, right? Creating the factory and doing this, because that frightened people, right? This notion that somehow we're not even making things anymore. I mean, let's go back to the Dutch, who thought that this was somehow destroying humanity, this mechanization. And so they were told to take their wooden shoes off, you know, because she's wearing wooden shoes right now. Yeah. So they took their sabots, right, their wooden shoes, and threw it into the mills so they would have sabotage, right, which we get the word from, this stuff. And so to kind of stop this thing that's happening, right, this something that's destroying us, and yet they have this very, in the Netherlands, this kind of very Protestant work ethic idea too, and this balance that we're somehow losing ourselves that Friedrich Hegel had talked about anymore. Yes? This is also the matter of rich versus the poor, right? That once again, we have, like I said, the birth of corporations in Holland and all this kind of stuff. This notion that we should even be able to take financial risk without losing something like that. That's why that was happened. The tulip craze and those kinds of stuff that dominated them. So we've had this labor. What's interesting about us, Americans, is the story we often tell in this nation. Now I'm from South Texas, right? The story I tell, of course, is the Spanish influence moving up from the South. That's what we learn in school, landing in the cities down there, creating places like Laredo, Texas in the 1500s, right? Just as early, or Santa Fe, which at that time was Texas. All these kinds of things that were happening, that's the story. But in the East Coast, and then we go to school and we learn about the birth of America happened when? What is the birth of America according to the common story we tell mostly around November? 1620 and the landing at Plymouth Rock, right? By whom? There were already people here, by the way, lots of people, not just the native First Nations people who were already living here, but there were other groups of people living on our continent. But that's the story we tell. We tell their story from 1620, the Puritan landing into that, the same people who brought this Puritan work ethic with them. And it's amazing, if you look at all the spin-offs of these religious movements of the day, there were lots of them. Think of the Shakers, right? Listen, the only thing is work and wait for death. That's it. Don't have sex, don't do anything. And of course, the whole don't have sex thing made it hard to continue their congregations, which is what they got. The Amana people. Has anyone ever heard of the Amanas? Right, Amanas. What did they eventually create? The Amana radar range, right? The microwave oven, which is kind of interesting. But that, yeah, work, and that's what you do. You put your head down. It's fun to watch Amish and Mennonite people go to work because they come into work and they go to work. Now, I work with young teenagers. They come in the door. It's like, can I go to the restroom? I got to go get breakfast. And it's a very different kind of thing. Watching Amish and Mennonites work as you come in, you go to work because that is what you know, that's part of what you do. And so we have this kind of thing in the United States that we would say, even if we won $1 million, we'd still seem to define ourselves through our work. So the question is why is that? Does your work really define you? this is what Jacques Derrida and others came up with. It says, listen, there's something about us. You know, he's the guy who said, he created the notion we call deconstruction in philosophy, and mostly in literature, that was his thing. But that you take two ideas, like, you know, that poverty and wealth, or masculine versus feminine, and you look at whatever's the dominant opinion, and actually what he thought you should do is you should deconstruct that. Why did you come up with that opinion? Where did that come from? And actually there's an opposite side to your view. And somewhere between the opposite end, according to Jacques Derrida, and our beliefs today, somewhere lies the truth. And so he would look at labor and say, what are we driven? That's why Michel Foucault and some others, the damn French, they're always throwing out these things. But Foucault and some of the other French philosophers were basically said, no, it's all about power. That's one of the things that we can do that many people say, that we keep our ordered society going well and write laws in this country to this day to make sure people are working. And is that how we want to define ourselves? So the question I want to ask you is, what did we do? How do we create a life that is not just defined by who to work? You go up to meet someone, you say, hi, my name is Kurt. What's your name?
Debbie.
Debbie, hi. What do you do?
Educator.
My next thing out of my mouth is, what do you do?
Right. What do you
Now,
do?
what are you passionate about? What moves you? Tell me about your children. We start off just by introducing ourselves by saying, what do you do? And that eventually works its way into there. And for a lot of people, work was a horrible experience. You know, that was Frank, his name was something's Church. I was trying to think of his first name. I've actually worked with his daughter. And what's great is he said, you want to ruin a young kid, you send them to college for 4 years, and then you send them to some shitty internship. And that makes them doubt everything that they have done for the last 4 years, and that we would never make sure we do that. So here's the question. How do we define ourselves now? Do we need to rethink our connection to it? Or, as many philosophers say, have the capitalists won? Have we created a system where all of our sense of worth, all of our sense of our values is defined merely by what we do in those kinds of stuff? So how do we break out of that? And we'll take, now you can talk. Okay.
All right, since we're speaking about the French, I just wanted to point out, I learned recently by reading a book that in many periods of time in France, laborers weren't, or actually people who worked for themselves were not allowed to work past a certain time because it was considered an unfair advantage if you worked into the night. That's a difference of thinking. And it's still like that in France. People look at each other and like, well, you're doing too much. That's not fair. You have to slow down. But anyway, the French government is now giving value to other types of work. One of them is taking care of young children, taking care of older adults who need help. Being a caretaker is now going to be monetarized. So you're going to be earning a salary when you do those things. And I think it's very interesting in this age of automation and AI, where a lot of jobs are disappearing, how we can now give more value to things that we took for granted for a very long time, especially when women did them. So I think that's one way that we can give people value for what they do.
Sure. Others? Yeah, Anu?
Just a couple of things that came to my mind, that it's really strange that among the Hindu philosophy, there is 3 ways to basically become one with the God. And one of them is called Karma Yoga, which is through work. And it doesn't mean that you have to work too much or you should torture yourself, but work is also doing work properly, doing work with passion. It's one of the ways to reach that oneness, which is like a very, very ancient philosophy. And that's something came to my mind. The other thing I was thinking is, if you are really passionate about doing something, like now that we have this large number of knowledge workers, right? And then you are so interested in what you are doing, and if you are sort of defined by what you are doing, it's something people like. And I am not saying it in only in terms of making money, but something that you really understand, you love it, you get to do it every day. And if you are known, like, for example, if somebody is working on, let's say AI, but not like working like applied, but understanding how it actually works, and if they are even teaching it free on YouTube channel, and if they are defined by that, I'm sure it's a big pride in it that, oh, I understand this whole new technology, how it works inside, and that's where it also comes very close to philosophy, and that's what it defines me. It's great pride.
Sure. The economist Michael Muthu Krishna, his book is The Theory of Everyone. I highly recommend you read it. He says, yeah, unfortunately, that's where we're heading. We're going to have the knowledge workers, and everything else is going to be replaced by technology, right? By AI, by artificial intelligence. We already heard, I remember going to hear a presentation by the Department of Labor under the Obama administration, and the guy predicted that within the next 20 years that a massive amounts of people's jobs would be gone because we can't build an economy on that. And Michael Muthu Krishna says that's a problem, because if we don't have everybody engaged in this new kind of economy, if they're not learning how to rescale and to do these things and reinventing themselves, young adults will have to reinvent themselves every single time in a way that we didn't do. You got a job at the factory, you worked there for 40 years, and then you retired from the factory. Now technology is changing so quickly, you're going to have to stay up on top of things every single year. So Grayson, so sorry about that. Hope it works out for you. But yeah, there you go. I'm going to hand this over to, and nice to see you're here, and I hope your brother's doing well.
Actually, covering very well. So
great, thank you.
So I think
The little light on?
hello? Okay.
There we go.
I think there could be a good version of work. Even like Aristotle, for example, while he denigrated work, I think he would be comfortable with like contribution, right? Like contribution to a community. So that is work in a sense, just like you, Curt, sure you worked hard making this presentation and doing all of this stuff. That's work, but it's work you have control over and for a purpose that you feel connected to. And unfortunately, to get to that on a societal level, I think the only way to do it is organizing, increase in labor unions, and making sure more and more people have more control over their work so they can define it and they can direct it, and so that they can make sure that they have more time outside of work to do the kind of work they want. Maybe one law or set of policies that could help is something Germany does, where they make sure that any large company has to have a certain amount of their board of directors be employees. That seems to work pretty decently for them, so that, for example, if Mercedes or Volkswagen wants to send jobs overseas or just close and shutter their factory, they have to get approval of the board. If a third of the board is employees, they don't want to lose their jobs, they're going to vote against it. So expanding control to workers, whether through labor organizing or legislation, I think could help, hopefully.
Sure. And I do want to mention something you said about Aristotle. How many of you actually loved your work and thought it did kind of define you as a person? Right, so there was that basis in his philosophy as saying, yes, there's something about our work that, we're just not sitting at home eating bonbons and watching, TV all day long. We actually feel like we're self-creating ourselves through that whole kind of process. The problem is to what extent, and more so, we can do that today. We have more control over our creative levels than we certainly would have done in a factory, which we have no access. That was Marx's whole thing, that people were alienated from that. But are we fully able to identify ourselves through our work? Fisher's thought, well, actually, no, you're sitting in a cubicle somewhere, you think you're happy and you think you're doing these things, but actually you're just still part of the capitalist system that's basically defining your labor. It's a struggle.
I was going to say, sorry, companies, I feel like they exploit that desire for contribution. They say, no, you're part of a team, but. But
Yeah.
yeah, you're a family.
Yep, that's how they got me here. So, yeah, Jerry, and then we'll do some online. I see your hand, Joel. Go ahead.
I just have two concerns. One is how people see me, and the other is how I see myself. I've had jobs in which I've been an executive director, and I also worked in a drugstore. And I had a struggle with that and my image. Ethical culture was interesting because I see it as a meeting place for intelligentsia. Do I fit in here, or do I fit in the local block association helping to keep the place clean?
Yep, great. Let's go online to Joel, and then we're going to go to Jim right behind you. Oh, you were just, I got it. Go ahead, Joel.
I was just gonna say, amongst my, friends and acquaintances, I feel like as a geologist that really loves being a geologist, I'm one of the few people who does feel defined by their work in a positive way. And yet, I still do sit in a cubicle and I don't do the type of geology I'd like to do. And yeah, if I had $1 million, I'd be hard pressed if I wanted to just go self-fund my own research or give it away. It would be hard for me because I do love what I do. So it's almost like, that's nice and it's wonderful in a certain way, but I can't imagine not doing it, so that's a problem. I don't know if I could relax.
Yeah, so work is this cause of angst, and it's upsetting, especially if we're in a bad work environment. It sucks the life out of us. How many of you have had a job in the past that literally sucked the life out of you sometimes? Okay, you didn't do enough jobs that I did. So yeah, that's the thing, but it's also can define us and allow for a certain sense of creativity. So Diane.
My question, is this on? Yes, good, thanks. My question is how to get humans to do the yucky stuff that no one wants to do except for pay, in effect. I mean, that's the brilliance of money. You drain septic tanks, you work in a nursing home and work with difficult, elderly, demented human beings, try and be kindly to them, but it can't be fun.
Sure.
How do you incentivize the tough stuff, the icky stuff, the unpleasant stuff, so that it does get done for the benefit of everybody?
Sure.
And maybe the counterbalance is, why should people who love exercising power and making deals and get millions of dollars, they're doing what they love. They can't leave political office because they can't imagine doing anything else with themselves. Why should we pay them to do it? They're getting a lot of fun, and we're paying them a lot of money.
Yep. Thank you. So we'll take one more comment back there. Go ahead, Carol. Pass the mic for her. Thank you.
I've had more different kinds of jobs than I have fingers and toes. And every time I got a promotion, I turned it down until I finally hit the job I liked. And that was because I worked outside. I didn't have to sit at a desk or a chair. I got out. And that was the only job I liked. And that's what I was doing when I met my husband.
Great.
And he didn't like the job I had. And I told him, well, I did like it. But we moved to New Jersey, and my job was in New York. So that was the end of that.
That's the end of that, right. Right, and to a certain extent, we could even go deeply into what a feminist critique of this stuff, that how many women gave up their careers or other things like that to raise children and got out of that. Did you want to add to that, or are you just agreeing with that? You just got exploited by him, and you just want to share that. Yes. No, I agree. Yeah, we move, we give that, so it's a whole other layer of saying, oh, well, you need to do this, we need to change those kinds of stuff. We'll give the last comment to Daniel. We got to bring this to an end. So, Dan, pass that back, please.
Thanks. So, coming back to, was that Matt over there who was talking before?
Matt Miller.
I think one of the things that people fear about a world in which production becomes so efficient that not everyone has to engage in wage labor, comes back to that notion that I was talking about before and that Matt was alluding to as well, of work as contribution to the overall good. I mean, we are probably biologically social animals. None of us could survive, well, almost none of us could survive alone in the woods with no contact with anyone else. Maybe a few hardened characters, but we know just by their peculiarity that that is not the general nature of human beings, and it isn't even in pre-literate societies that, you know, don't have, quote, modern, unquote, conveniences. We're social animals, and there's an expectation and an understanding, and probably almost a biological species being, if you will, that we are part of a community, and that what we do contributes to that community. And I think the fear is that, especially where work has become alienated, I like the translation estranged better, actually, because it doesn't have the psychotherapeutic aura of alienated, where work has become estranged from what we do, from our social creativity. There's that fear that everyone will be just lazy and not contribute in any way in a world where production becomes so efficient that our basic physical needs are met with very little effort, and I use the word effort in the most physical sense, on our part. And I think, again, that underlies it, and it's more than just Puritan Protestant ethics stuff. I think it's a real deep-seated thing about us as social beings, that everyone will become just selfish recluses. And so, you know, I think we have to come to grips with the notion that there are ways in which one can be creative and contribute that should not be and can't be eliminated by the increasing efficiency of production.
Let's hope not.
And I'll just point to two songs that reflect two very different views on that. Charlie King, I don't know how many people know who Charlie King is. Great political songwriter, been around for decades. He had a song that he wrote probably 50 years ago called, the refrain says, "Our life is more than our work, and our work is more than our job." Think about that. And on the flip side, emphasizing the estrangement of work from life, from the Threepenny Opera, Bertolt Brecht's song, "What Keeps a Man Alive," which has been variously translated from German.
Thank you.
And well worth getting to know. It has that great line, it doesn't translate well into English, "Erst kommt das Fressen, dann kommt die Morale." First comes the grub, the eating, then comes morality. You know, you got to get the physical needs first.
So we have to bring this to an end. You know, it's really fascinating that after the pandemic and people went back to work, that many of the American workers said they were like walking into this space and it felt strangely like, what is this space I used to occupy so much of my time and attention? What am I doing now here? What is this thing? Why can't I be at home and work? And so I don't think we have fully recognized how much work consciousness works into our minds. And there are many philosophers and critiques of philosophy who would say that maybe culture has enculturated you, the capitalist or whomever, have enculturated you to be exactly where you are. And so I bring you back to Derrida's thing, can we question why we value this thing? If we would say that so much of what I'm doing gets defined by sitting in front of a computer for 92 hours a day, being hyper efficient, but who am I? And through that whole process, who are you as a human being? And that the notion of what the ancient Greeks thought is there something more important to life that we've lost in our hyper-efficient, hyper-working American culture and to go back to. So thank you for coming. Oh, yep, 2 seconds. You got to keep it real brief.
Somewhere along the way you touched on it, and I wanted to have you expound, but of course now it's late. Anyway, but I was wondering about when and how the disappearance of pride of craft occurred.
Sure.
Which has a lot tied in with everything.
I recommend some of you read Wendell Berry. And he says, actually, you've been turned into consumers. You're no longer homemakers, right? They can even build apartment complexes now in New York City that doesn't have a kitchen because all you need is to order food and order these things. You're no longer participating in your own household in a certain extent. And then we're often described that the American consumers are. And so that notion, Wendell Berry, the poet, says of that we've just been reduced to like locusts who go out there and we can just make money off of the system. As long as you're spending, as long as you're shopping, as long as you're buying things, things are fine. So we're going to bring this to a close. I want to thank Curt Collier for cooking that delicious breakfast.
To learn more about us, visit our website, ethicalfocus.org, or email us at admin@ethicalfocus.org and we'll get back to you. To make a donation, go to ethicalfocus.org/donate. Please follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and you can watch many of our past programs on our YouTube channel.